Okay, we've overcome our technical difficulties. So we're going to finish chapter 2, which Paul started last week, Accept God's Healing Grace by Carolyn Brock. And so I'm going to kind of speed through some of these slides. If there's a comment you want to make, go ahead and make it about these. If she has a little different view of shame and sin, I think. But this one says shame, or the fear of shame or abandonment, is at the root of what we have traditionally called sin, which I thought was
23.
differently. Usually we think of just something you do, but some act you commit or that. But I thought that was interesting. Said shame is at the root. Sin is not so much a set of behaviors as it is the identity from which we choose our behaviors. What's that mean to you anyway?
I think first I think for me, it's, when you're in a bad place, you tend to make more bad choices.
Well, she's going to talk about identity a little bit more. So here's shame is a distorted identity we take on when we are cut off from the sacred self, the true self, the God-connected self, the beloved self. And I would have said it from our sacred self, our true self, our God-connected self, our beloved self. I just would have used our, because that's who she's talking about, is each of us. We have a distorted identity. And then she went ahead and said, sin is not the result of some inherent evil, as we have mistakenly believed. The opposite is true. Sin is the result of separation from them, the seed of inherent light and goodness in us. Sin is what happens when we think we are our egos, which she says is also superficial self. Do you think of sin that way?
I hadn't, but
It's a good way of looking at it, I'd say. Karen and I answer our question.
Yeah.
Are we on chapter 3 now?
2.
we're still
on 2.
We're still on 2?
We're going to finish 2 and then get to 3.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You think of sin in this way. Sin is the destructive attitudes and life patterns. And she lists a bunch of things. Guilt, addictions. When the ego self must prove itself worthy. And the ego self is the superficial self. That sin is the sickness that causes us to shame, abuse, manipulate, control, or ridicule others so we can feel more powerful, more secure, and less vulnerable to shame.
I think just using the word sin, I don't know. It doesn't do it.
it has a bad connotation.
I just think,
Well, these other ideas about sin, though, do they work better for you then?
I don't even like that word sin.
Okay.
And
Okay.
this
Substitute over.
context.
Well, what's your substitute then?
Or judgment.
Okay. Well, that's
I guess that when they talk about the ego and stuff and not being your best self,
okay.
but to call it sin is very judgmental sounding. I guess life is judgmental.
Well, we're working with vocabulary from the Old Testaments.
Oh.
So that's what they called it in the Jewish culture. Okay, well, let's get into something. Maybe you can relate to this then. What about the story of Carolyn Brock herself? She thought she was fundamentally flawed when she was 16 years old. She didn't measure up to what she thought the world valued. So what did you think of her profound spiritual awakening to the words of counsel that the evangelist spoke at the camp she was at? You didn't read that part? It's on the left-hand side of the page. So I think it was. Well, she's oops. Well, he said he saw a light over her head. Remember, she's 16 years old. She's at a camp, and she doesn't think she's worth much.
She the author.
Carolyn Brock is the author of chapter 2.
Well, there are parents that put that on there. And let
Well,
them know from the beginning that they're bad and that they're, worthless and such a sad
hey,
thing.
Jim, can I borrow your-
To put a child under that kind of pressure. I don't know Carolyn Brock very well, but I know her well enough.
I think there's some extra ones over.
Interacted with her enough
on
time.
the shelf.
It's hard to imagine herself.
But as a 16-year-old, don't you think that every person goes through feeling
Yeah.
there's inferior or insecure or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole thing, is she was saying the world sets certain standards, and it's worse now because of social media. And everybody's posting, this is what I did, this is,
Yeah.
my new clothing that I'm wearing, this is my makeup that I'm using. Every other person on Facebook is a so-called influencer. And then when you don't meet, those standards, shameful language is applied to you, and what's the natural result? You're gonna feel bad about yourself.
I never grew out of it.
well, here's what she said, or here's what he said. Tom Coffin said there, he said, "You are one of my jewels. I see you. I know you. I am forming you into one who will serve and love and become whole." That she says those weren't the exact words. That's the message she got. So
I think instead of telling people how bad they are, how bad they look or how wrong their things are about them, that evangelist was reminding her that, you were created in God's image. You're perfect the way you are.
So she says the reality that I was loved for the light, the spirit, the presence that lives deep in the heart of me was physically, emotionally, and spiritually overwhelming. That's what she got from her experience when he spoke to her. So.
I don't know, I have a little trouble identifying that. I appreciate hearing the story. I never felt that I was flawed. I mean, sometimes I was in the store. What career should I pursue and all that. But I never thought I was flawed.
You didn't compare yourself to the cheerleaders and the.
Maybe I've just always marched to the tune of a different.
I'll second that.
People were not like.
Well, so you didn't have the problem that Carolyn did, but anyway, so that message might not have done
I'm
much.
sure that through adolescence, there are moments of self-doubt. Well, I carried it in late in adulthood. Because I kind of grew up never feeling that I could be good enough.
Okay,
To for your parents? I mean, where was that expectation? What was the source?
I think my parents, my mother was, for some reason, she got hung up on perfection. And that got on us. And so I felt like I could never do anything well enough. And so I always felt less than. And it's just been since my divorce that I finally got more healed.
Yeah.
I won't say completely healed.
So what about this concept? She says, Carolyn goes ahead and says, this same light is in you that he said was in her. She says, this is how healing begins. This is the way that we are transformed from our false selves, back to this identity, into the truth that sets us free. Do you believe her,
Yes.
Jane?
Well,
Speak louder.
yes. All who hear,
Jonathan's on.
16 years old. I'm totally relating to her because I was so mystical at age 16. I believed what the adults were telling me. And so I don't know about you guys, but I went to camps and I thought I saw God every single year. But I realize now that it was probably emotion. And then I had to learn, I had to learn. She heard the Holy Spirit through this evangelist say to her that she was worthy. And I had one of those moments where I finally figured out the difference. And there's this, there's this moment when you're like, oh, that's not emotion, that's spirit. It's different.
It is, I think it's all internal work. And when you are born, you're born into a tribe, you're kind of trained in the tribal group thing. And
Okay.
then as you mature and you start to have these thoughts of that might be a little bit different, there's insecurity involved in that. And so it's just finding that place in yourself that it's all internal work and be okay with that.
I think
And someone in their 40 like this evangelist, yeah, I think that made a difference for her, because it's not going to work. It might not work for your parent to say that because of all of these internal insecurities that we might have. But if it's somebody that you trust, for me, it was this, this leader or director saying it to me, it's like, oh, there's this really aha moment where you finally say, maybe
Yeah,
I am worthy.
I'm okay.
Well,
So she experienced healing through that experience.
I was going to say, I believe that there's the light is in each of us. It just may take us, we may never find it because you kind of have to go find it.
Right, it's work.
It is. And I mean, you might get a glimpse of it and say, oh, there it is. But some people may never know that they have the light now because of everything they go through in their life.
Okay, so I know Joyce doesn't like this word, but Jesus healed and pronounced God's forgiveness of sins. So what does that mean to you? In other words,
I think we think we are so imperfect and we are afraid that we are unforgivable. And I think what Jesus did was tell people they're forgiven. That even from, I don't want to say the worst sins, but from some pretty bad sins, we can come back and that we're loved.
Aaron?
Jesus is saying the word.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to say
Yeah.
that.
There was a secretary at work with a little placard on her desk, and I think that's a time in my life that said, progress, not perfection.
Okay.
Are you making progress?
Did you hear that, Jonathan?
No,
Sharon, Sharon had a person she worked with, they had a sign on their desk that said, progress, not perfection.
I like that. And unfortunately, my mother raised me thinking that, be perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think a lot of young people in the church in the 40s, 50s, and 60s were raised with that concept.
Well, I think the title at the top of the slide goes along with that. Forgiveness is what is Jesus really healing. He wasn't just saying, okay, the 5 things you did yesterday that were against the Mosaic law or whatever, you're forgiven. For those, he was healing the shame that they'd experienced as a result of being outcast, as a result of being unclean, as they were told by the church hierarchy of that day, and as we're told by Christian hierarchy often today. So he's healing shame. He's not just saying, okay, I'm forgiving your sin. He's actually changing their life. He's actually inviting them into a transformative experience.
Well, back then and still today, in a lot of areas, people think that the reason you get sick or the reason something bad happens is because you did something wrong. You were
Yeah.
sinful, and so Jesus in that way would have told them, forgiven their sins. So then that would psychologically even give them the okayness that was done with, you're okay now.
Well, I do think sometimes with your shame, you can carry it to the point that you make yourself ill.
Yeah.
Well, I think authority figures have the power to make you feel that way. And we put too much trust in authority figures that are human as well. And so instead of being encouraged to find that place in yourself, that what is my best self?
But do you give them that power? Or
We're trained to
As
do
children,
that.
as children
And
you do, for sure.
Authority figures use fear and shame to keep you there.
Okay.
And it's hard to, it's really hard to buck up against that and to be the outsider sometimes.
I think people that are wanting revenge are doing it because they feel shame. And they want to be rid of that feeling that they're better than what this person caused them to feel.
April?
I mean, how many people in this room grew up with the phrase respect your elders? Like, elders have been always held up to a higher authority than anything. And so they are the easiest one to drag us down. And unfortunately, even if it's a little bit of power, it does corrupt, and people will use it to their advantage.
I'm gonna put some bullet points. So here, it's just one of the points, Jesus healed by seeing and freeing the deeper self, the divine image in people. And that's what Paul was, he removed the shame and sin that hides the light within us. You think of maybe, shame covers your light so you can't shine your light.
Shame is the basket. We hide the flame. Yeah,
Oh, the whistle.
this little light.
So I'm not a psychoanalyst or anything, so I'm ego and things like this, I start getting a little, I'm not the most knowledgeable. But Jesus healed the ego that needs the shame system to keep people broken, easy to rule and oppress.
That was the whole leadership system in
Yeah.
his day then.
Worked for them.
Yeah. Yeah, for a lot of people.
So here's a question. Wasn't Jesus' message and mission to free us from the distorted idea of God as one who sees us as shameful rather than as beloved?
I'd say yes.
Okay, I'll have to read this one. Doesn't this distortion of God keep us from knowing God as healing grace and knowing ourselves as whole and free in God? You think of God as one who shames you.
Oh, I hear a lot of Christians that I don't agree with. They seem to have the image of God as revenge and retribution. And I thought, no, Jesus said God is not love. And that puts a whole different perspective on it, if you think that God is, rooting for you and wanting you to improve and become more filled with light, rather than just going out ready to smack you when you've done something foolish.
We have 2,000 years of Christianity telling us you're so bad that somebody else had to die for you.
Well,
You're that bad. Now, what, have you done any sins that somebody else should have to die for you? And yet that's the message that we've been given. I think it's the wrong message. I think Carolyn's got a good idea here and has a good track on the right message.
Okay, we won't go into depth on all these but over the centuries, when Paul was just talking about why did Jesus die, there's been many theories been put forth as to why Jesus died. Here's only 6 of them, but these are probably more commonly known. The moral influence theory, the ransom theory, Christus victory theory, satisfaction theory, penal substitutionary theory, scapegoat theory. And so these are kind of a condensed version. If I don't do justice to it, well, I may have 2 or 3 sentences to give. So moral influence, Jesus trying to give a good example to his followers, and he was crucified as a martyr because of his radical example, his moral example. Ransom theory, Jesus' death was a ransom payment, God's ransom payment to Satan because of Adam's original sin, which, since we don't have, meaning Christ doesn't really believe in the original sin, that hold to that belief, that makes it. Christus victory theory, Jesus died to defeat the powers of evil and free humankind from bondage. There wasn't any payment involved. And I thought this was interesting. This is what I read. This was the dominant theory in Christianity for 1,200 years, and then it got replaced by this theory, which is by Anselm, the satisfaction theory, where Jesus died in order to pay back the injustice of human sin and to satisfy the justice of God. The next one is the one that's most commonly put forth, that you hear quite often particularly from evangelicals, that Jesus died to satisfy God's wrath against human sin. Jesus is punished, that's the penal part, in the place of sinners, that's the substitution, to satisfy the justice of God and the legal demands of God to punish sin. And then those are all kind of at least a few hundred years old. The scapegoat theory, I think, is a little more modern. Jesus died as a scapegoat for humanity. He was a victim, not a sacrifice. He was killed by a violent crowd that believed he was guilty. His innocence was proved by his resurrection, and that proved the violent crowd's guilt. So there's some theories, but here's what Carolyn Brock wrote. That's where I wanted to get to. She wrote, Jesus died because he lived from a profound and fearless spiritual identity that was dangerous to the powers of his day. He lived from a place of absolute freedom and oneness with God, absolute certainty of not just worth, but sacredness. So does her writing, her belief align with any of these 6, or does she have a different idea on Jesus' death?
Too bad, the moral.
Moral influence theory?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Is that the first one listed?
It was a couple of slides back.
Yeah, it was the first one.
Yeah, that's the one I was.
Okay.
I just want to say that I agree that the evangelicals have developed that penal theory or punishment theory, but it does say in 1 Corinthians, this was written by Paul, for I delivered to you what was of importance, what I also received, that Christ died for our sins. I mean, that's about as clear as you can.
Well, there's scriptures to support all those, I think.
Yeah.
There's a phrase here or there that I think supports all of those.
Well, I just didn't want us to think that this is just something that popped out in the last couple hundred years.
Oh no, that's an old theory too. It's just evangelicals are really strong in that one.
Dan, I've wrestled with all of these over the year. And so when you try to boil it down to one, the best thing that works for me is I feel he died to show us the way of life after death and the resurrection.
Okay, well, you would kind of merge the moral influence with the Christus victory about the resurrection. So some people say, well, you kind of don't focus too much on any particular one. There's a little bit in each one that's got a little bit that you could think about. And it's complex. So here's also in chapter 2 is Charles Neff, or I should say in chapter 3, actually. But here's what he wrote. And I'll just let you read it and see if you think his aligns with any of those theories or if he's saying something different.
I didn't see one of those theories of the Jesus the Rebel, Jesus the Revolutionary. Which one, I'm not sure which one would be closest to that. It's kind of what Carolyn Brock was saying.
Well, that's what Neff's saying.
Yeah, and that's what Neff is saying, but
Well,
I
that
all
could-
those theories that you gave us, I'm not sure where it fits.
He could have been the scapegoat. You know, he suffered the punishment for being revolutionary. Or in the first one, he was a martyr because he was a radical example. That was a moral influence.
Okay.
Well, I think that's kind of a newer theory that Jesus died at the hands of the government rather than at the hands of the Jews, which we just spent 6 months learning about. That was not the case. That Jesus really was killed for, I guess, the Roman government, I think, setting himself up as a king. It couldn't do it.
Well, but I would also say it was the powers that be and the religious power, the authorities. I think that Rome and the religious authorities.
Yeah, as long as,
But-
I mean, I
but
think the
religious
Romans were pretty
authority-
respectful of the rights, as long as it didn't influence how they were run.
But I mean, it
I
was
think Jesus did.
it was the powerful that, were offended by Jesus because he was upsetting their,
The
the status quo.
Well, I'm going to move on because I don't have much time, but there's a lot of theories about why Jesus died, and there's probably a scripture that supports every one of those. I want to ask, so what does this discussion of shame, grace, and healing have to do with peace and justice in the church?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. I think it all boils down to freedom. And we have an injured principle about the worth of all person.
Okay.
So I think there's been a lot of actions throughout history because some were thought some person, group of people wasn't there.
Okay.
So it was all right to suffocate them, or and still that way, yeah.
Well, and
Or just be unkind.
Well,
It's okay.
okay. So Carolyn says shame and unhealed human ego are powerful barriers to shalom. That's why we've been talking about shame then. And she believes that until our shame is healed and our ego is incorporated into our spiritual identity, back to ego things here, as God's beloved, we will resist efforts towards justice and shalom.
well, if you have shame, you can't have peace within yourself.
Okay.
I think that people and congregations that work down in some of the inner city areas where there's a lot of disconnect, I think they are so powerful when they go out into the community and are able to bring people to a sense of belonging and a sense of worthiness. Because, we don't always get involved in somebody who's really have major problems bringing them back. But, some of those that go in and where they haven't really had touch with God in much of anyways for years, makes a big difference.
I do think we need to talk about how Mission Road can be that difference for our community too. I mean, Kanika was telling me that at the prayer service last Wednesday, she actually asked this question. You were there, Dorothy. Where I thought that was fascinating that you guys just kind of did once again, when we do it 100 times a year, but this time was a little bit different because they were really focused on, like one of the great things was let's reach out to the Prairie Village. Let's get that newspaper from the Prairie Village. We used to get it all the time, but let's find out what activities Prairie Village is having.
Okay.
And then insert ourselves into that for influence. That's what we try to do with our 4th of July party. Here we are, we got a presence, and you guys talked about, if we have the pet blessing service, which I've been wanting to do for years, but I liked how she focused on it, like get a big sign for the community. Everybody loves animals, so that might influence the community. I just thought it was cool that you guys were doing that on a Wednesday night. That's so productive in my mind, so that's something for healing.
Okay.
Well, we talked about maybe getting some notices in the Prairie Village
Yeah,
magazine,
yeah.
The Village Visitor or
Right,
whatever it's
right,
called.
yeah. Village Voice, yeah.
Village Voice, yeah.
I love that idea. We'll follow up on this.
So will we keep our egocentric identity or say yes to a spirit-filled, grace-based identity that leads to justice and shalom? Okay, as far as making the church a place of healing, God's agenda is mending of creation, shalom, which total health and well-being is God's dream.
Yeah, and shalom, as I understand it, is not really equivalent to this peace. Shalom encompasses the idea of peace, right? Not just absence of conflict, but making things right, or helping make things right.
So because Jesus, using the moral influence theory, he lived among us as an example, as a healer and restorer of wholeness. And as his followers, shouldn't we feel like we're called to be healers and restorers of wholeness? And to do that, like Coral was saying, won't we have to be healed of shame ourselves, have our egos freed, feel like we are beloved?
You have to fill your cup before you can fill somebody else's cup. Is what I learned in yoga.
Okay.
I went to a seminar on that.
So the church is a spiritual home where we are formed into ministers of grace and healing. Here's some of the characteristics: a healing place, a place for spiritual formation, countercultural, diverse, compassionate, and learning. Okay. We'll move on to chapter 3 about stand up for justice. Grant McMurray, 25 years ago, said the path of the disciple requires us to stand up for the cause of justice. And Bolton gives us three examples in his chapter: Martin Luther King, Emma Smith, Charles Neff. And I'm going to add if we have time, I'm going to add a fourth one. Person I doubt anybody here has heard of, Catherine Coleman Flowers. But we'll talk about her later. So I think we're all familiar with the story of Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to some white person in 1955. That led to the Montgomery City bus boycott. And Martin Luther King was pastor in the Baptist church in Montgomery, and he became the leader. What did you think of his experience when he received this threatening phone call? One night during the boycott, about midnight, he got this phone call. He'd gotten phone calls before that threatened him, but this one somehow hit a nerve.
Oh, it wasn't
Squirrel?
just against himself, it was also against his wife and his basically newborn
His baby daughter.
baby. I think, and he's thinking, okay, this is not for me. I'm not gonna do it anymore. It's too much. And he talks about sitting down and something that his father had said to him and just laid it out to God, where he got the strength to carry on.
Boy said something like, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth. And then he said something like, I will always be with you.
Well, and he also mentions they hemmed the balm of Gilead.
Yeah, well, that was like a balm hearing those words,
Yeah.
having the experience. So stand up for justice and I will be with you. That helped him, stick with the, what he thought. He said, I thought I was doing something right, but I was feeling weak at the time.
Who wouldn't?
So that was his experience. Now, Emma Smith, that she was involved with the early church. One time she, in 1844, so she was the president of the Female Relief Society. And she was strongly opposed to polygamy, and she made it known she was opposed to polygamy. What would you think of her? What happened at the Relief Society?
Well, she got all the women together, and then I guess the men shut down the Relief Society when they.
Didn't you wonder? I wondered. She said she made it known that she was opposed to polygamy, but she also had the women in the society take an oath affirming virtue.
Yeah.
And then, for some reason, I'm not sure what their argument was, the men shut down the society. Now, how can you oppose affirming virtue? I don't know, but that's what happened.
Still happens.
Did they think the women were getting too uppity and?
I guess so. Telling those men what to do, or what they weren't going to stand for. Was this also the one where they told the story about Joseph was putting in a bar?
Yeah.
That's the next one.
Oh, yeah, Joe's Bar and Grill.
Her bar that didn't last long at the mansion house.
Yeah.
So Emma didn't think that was right. So what did she do? Anybody remember?
Kicked it out.
Either it goes or I and the children go.
Not only that, and she wasn't going to run the
Yeah.
hotel anymore in the mansion.
Yeah.
Nope,
So
it was shutting down.
immediately the bar was out.
Oh, and the story I read was, that led to the word of wisdom, where he said that strong drink is not allowed. So it was like, she didn't want him drinking, but he didn't like that she was drinking a lot of coffee with her ladies.
Oh.
I would.
Is that a false story?
I think the word of wisdom came out in the 30s, 1835 or something, earlier
It was different
than the Nauvoo. I mean, it was before Nauvoo.
Well, the smoking kind of came out along with the drinking because they were spitting on the
That's
floor.
right.
Yeah.
She was
And
all upset.
She was
about
mad about having to clean up the mess, so next thing you know, it's bad boys out.
So Emma stood up for what she thought was right. And maybe if Joseph had listened to her, things might have been radically different for the early church. How about her influence on the reorganization?
Well, I just finished the new Joseph the Third book, and basically, after Joseph's death, she really didn't push her children, allowed them to find their own way. That she was very supportive when Joseph Smith the Third.
Joseph III and Alexander, his younger brother, were both, they were very
So is there
active leaders in the church.
is there a new Joseph third book?
Yeah,
Oh,
There's a new
Because I read
Actually,
the autobiography.
Ron Roming has got a new book out.
I'm gonna pass it down to him.
Yeah, sure.
I just finished it last night, I think.
So there you are. So how about injustices women have stood against and brought about change? Anything you women want to mention?
It's a very big question.
Now, we only have a few minutes, so we're not going to take the rest of the hour.
Every right women have ever gotten
Yeah,
is because
Yeah.
women fought for it.
Okay.
And fought hard.
I was gonna say
We're
voting
looking at
rights.
one
so-
right there. Eloise led the
Voting
way.
rights, reproductive rights, I mean,
Being able to.
being able to have a credit
name.
card without a
Yeah.
man signing
Yep.
for
Yeah.
you.
My mother actually forged my father's signature. to get her own credit card.
I
love my
had
mother.
trouble
Yeah.
Yeah,
as
after
an
he
early
died.
newlywed,
Wow.
getting a credit card in my name.
Yeah, this was in 1981.
Yeah,
This is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We had to fight for everything.
everything. Being able to play a sport.
Right.
Yeah.
Men have not given up their power easily, and
Pushing.
they're still not. Now
I was
they're
gonna say.
clawing it back.
Yeah,
They're not doing
They're
that.
not, they're.
well, and I was gonna say the church, as far as women in ordination. I mean, the women had to keep pushing to say, this isn't right.
I got many phone calls.
That's right.
Oh, well, but you did.
Threatening.
Yeah.
That's why this last World Conference, all of you came back so joyful because not only are the women feeling that they might have a little bit of power in the church, but I thought it was profound that the men were celebrating that too. That was important to me to see.
Well, and not just in this case, women, but also the first African-born counselor to the president.
Right.
A Black African
Yeah,
in the first presidency.
yeah. It mentions in the chapter that Charles Neff, in the early 80s, he wrote an article in the Herald, and he got a lot of, well, it actually came up, he supported ordination of women, but came back like 2/3 were positive, 1/3 was negative. But so he got some of that. So he was, I thought it was interesting. Cooey thought, who was a counselor to the president, prophet of the church, thought Neff was the most prophetic minded person in Community of Christ, or LDS at that time, for his era.
And there's a new book out about Charles Neff too.
Yes.
Well, he was, he upset a lot of people because of how open he was to accepting others. He went to India and that was where they had polygamy.
Oh, yeah.
And then the, people back here lost their mind.
Well, we were the anti-polygamy church. That was, really terrific.
They definitely opened up.
So do you think opening up was his biggest impact? Thinking
What opening?
opening up new
Area?
countries was his
Yeah.
biggest impact, would you say, or something
I
else?
think it was opening up it was opening up minds to see, we were so enclosed, we'd been such a looking inward church for so long because of all those pains we had from early years. And here's them opening up these different places, and I mean, the
Yeah.
60s were kind of wild. They were. Wild times.
Didn't she say that he just had an act for,
Cooey did, yeah.
going into different cultures and
Right.
making friends?
And he was involved in Japan, Korea, Philippines, India, Nigeria,
Well,
some other country I can't think of,
and
where
it was in-
where the church finally established a presence, and they pointed out that in like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, we added like 12 countries and more than we'd done in the previous 130. So
Yeah,
it's,
here's flag thing, if they do it by years, and like, just like an explosion at that point.
Well, and because of his experience in the military, having been and I never know how to pronounce it properly, Hiroshima, weeks after the bomb was dropped.
that got him into trouble. He preached one sermon at a world conference in 84, where he spoke about his experience in Hiroshima and said that he'd been there like 3 weeks after the bomb was dropped. And he said there was, he said the despair and destruction was like overwhelming or something like that. Indescribable. And because of that experience, in this sermon, he preached against nuclear armament, the arms race, which was ramping up in the early 80s. And then so he said it was madness for the world to spend more in 2 weeks for military arms than it was needed to provide food, water, all these things that we need to thrive for all the world's residents for a year. I've got some.
Imagine what he would have said today.
Huh?
Can you imagine what he would have said today?
Oh.
What's going on in our world?
Yeah. He wasn't the first though. President Eisenhower in 53, I looked up his speech. He had said, like, and this is $53, so think, but he said a heavy bomber in 1953 cost more than to build 30 brick schools in the United States. And then he made some other comparisons of how much was spent for this and that. And he said something along the lines that every dollar you spend on armament is a dollar not spent on, providing for people. So he was kind of in the same camp as Neff, and he had been he was the general over the D-Day. He had seen war. He knew about that. So Neff asked, what shall we do? And this leads to, he said he would continue to support outreach in the evils of poverty, disease, ignorance, and hunger. So that was his, and he was the founder, led to the founding of Outreach. There's some organizations before Outreach that he was involved with that were standing up for justice.
So he kind of brought us back to Joseph III's view of being a peace church.
How so?
Well, Joseph Smith III gave a rousing. They were trying to get people to volunteer for service in the Civil War, and he gave such a rousing speech that there were like 17 people out of in the Nauvoo area, and then he was just kind of horrified about it. But I mean, at some point they saw peace as the way throughout the different parts of. He was talking against I don't know what happened. It was before World War I. It was in the early 1900s. There was a war coming up, and he basically preached. And for World War I, he preached being pacifist. What was
Nonviolent.
conscientious,
Conscientious.
but sort of like Switzerland, where you were
Neutral.
neutral.
Okay. Does anybody know about the PhD process of Outreach International?
That's the philosophy of,
Teach
giving
them
somebody a fish to eat versus teaching them to fish.
Okay.
They can fend for themselves.
Find out what's going on, find out what their priorities are. I mean, they meet every day. But what is the one
They go to find out, what the people themselves think they need.
Right.
Okay, so we don't spend much time on, but there's a table in the chapter 3 about the different approaches to abolishing poverty. The other 3, besides outreach's approach, were insurrection, social welfare, and community development. What was the one thing, or was there anything particularly that stood out in comparing those approaches? You'll have to look at the table unless you've got it memorized.
I remember, when they mailed out the booklets or sent out the booklets that you could buy a sheep or you could pay for, for half a dozen ducks or.
Yeah, but other communities, other society or organizations done that too.
Heifer International.
After International. Well, the one thing I noticed, I mean, there were several things the way they compared it, but one thing I noticed was the other 3, Bolton's table said they were top down, outreach was bottom up. So you work through the people at the grassroots level rather than telling them, here's what you need, or here's what we're going to do for you, or we're going to overthrow the government, whatever.
You have to believe what I believe in order to get this.
Yeah.
So here was just since outreach, he talked about the, whoops. I'm going backwards. Here I am. Okay, this was done by the Brookings Institution comparing how the world lives today, back in 2018 anyway. So they considered that we had made significant, there'd been a kind of like a really significant change made in the fact that less than half the world people lived in what they called extreme poverty or were vulnerable. Now you have to look and see what they called extreme poverty. Living on less than $1.90 per person per day. And if you were vulnerable, it was from $1.90 to $11 per day per person. You could be in middle class and live on $11 per day in some parts of the world, at least.
When we went to Thailand, April was 4 years old. They average Thai income at that time was $3.
So, of course, that was, we don't say how old you are.
So it's saying 3,160 million, the same as saying 3.1 billion, so that's a
Right.
lot of people.
Yeah, I put it all in millions so you could,
Yeah.
if you don't know the relation between millions and billions, so it's,
What do you mean by for the first time? What does that mean? What's the comparison?
before that point in time, there have been more people living in poverty, extreme poverty or vulnerable. Now there's at least half the world is supposedly middle class or rich.
Better than we were before.
From $1.90 to above $1.
Not church anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure I was looking, it's usually going up or down.
Okay, so that gives you a relationship. So I converted those into yearly incomes. If that helps you understand, relate to whatever you're earning or not earning. So Oxfam took a different look at it, though. They looked and said the 10 richest men were worth as much as the 3.1 billion people at the bottom.
Worse.
Yeah. And more the richest. Not gotten better.
What do you think of F.M. Smith's quote here? We might all feel a little guilty, I would say. Luxury is not justified only when commonly enjoyed. So can you be happy knowing others are not having the necessities?
That's the only reason that I make things to give away to charity. Because I have the money and the skill to make stuff, and I can do what little part I can.
Okay, so the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. Then we're in the human rights now in the last part of the chapter. Rights every person is born with. And then there's a Universal Declaration that was written back in 1948, where he doesn't list all the rights. There's about 30 rights they list in their declaration. I've got a copy if you want to read it.
Was this the Eleanor Roosevelt was instrumental in?
She was behind it, yes. There's something
I
that,
just want to point out another lady. How about Mr. Mary Shelley?
Knock it off.
No.
That's the problem.
So
There's
there's
more
issues,
women
Steve?
around than there are guys at the church anymore.
You know, you guys are really big head.
There lies the problem.
We're not getting a big head, we're just embracing our status.
We're trying to catch up.
A long ways to go.
Very true, which is that.
well, there were several rights. One he pointed out in this art in the chapter, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brother or sisterhood. Well, that's the idea. But they also point in there, you have the rights to an education, to being able to provide for yourself. So, like I said, it's the idea.
What year did this happen?
48. That's when right at the time the United Nations were created. How does believing in the worth of souls connect with human rights and justice? Well, if you have worth, then don't you have rights?
And how duplicitous as some people are, the Pledge of Allegiance. Liberty and justice for all.
Yeah.
So,
We know, it's like, we're the special.
so if we believe in the worth of souls, we will work with others for human rights for everyone.
How does the plaque at the Statue of Liberty go? Give us your foray.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
And Martin Luther King said in his letter from a Birmingham jail in '63, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay, I didn't get the flowers, but she was, she grew up in Lowndes County, Alabama, one of the poorest counties in the state. She left the county, did a lot of things, went to college, got married, was in the Air Force, all those things. But she felt called back to the county. She found that a lot of people there, especially the rural poor, couldn't afford basic sanitation. And she learned that wasn't a problem only in Alabama, but it was across the United States. Her book, which I've got right here, is One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret. And this is, she considers this a human right that have basic sanitation. And she was an advocate for that. And she kind of fell into it. It's almost accidental the way she got started. She went down to Alabama to Lowndes County to be in economic development, promote economic development. And a friend of a friend said, can you help my friend with her terrible situation? And it worked out. And she was in Lowndes County, she was actually distantly related. But anyway, she got started, found this person, it was a terrible setup. That's how she got started though. And so her example shows what, just trying to work for basic sanitation is standing up for justice. Then we're all out of time, but so this is Zion shall be redeemed by justice, seek to bring forth the cause of Zion. I like this. Zion is where the worth of persons and all human rights flourish. We can't talk about Zion without doing justice, beginning in our homes and congregations. How can we use our time, treasure, and talents to stand up for justice individually and as a congregation? So next week, chapter 4, pursue Christ's peace.